The internet made it easier than ever to find people who think like you. But in some cases, that connection turned into control. These are online communities that didn't just influence people, they took over their lives. Number 1. Love has won. It started with a woman named Amy Carlson, a former McDonald's manager who, around 2006, began claiming she had a divine mission to save humanity. Over time, she built an online following that would become known as Love Has Won, a group that believed she wasn't just spiritual, but literally God in human form.
Where the upset comes from me is as I serve love every day, and I am in love in action every moment.
According to her followers, she was billions of years old, had lived hundreds of past lives as figures like Jesus, Cleopatra, and Joan of Arc, and was guiding humanity into a higher dimension. The group didn't hide, they streamed everything. Daily live streams showed followers calling her Mother God, taking orders from her, and defending her every word. But behind that constant online presence, former members described something very different. People were expected to give up their money, their independence, and often their families to join the mission. Some followers reportedly handed over their belongings and income, believing it was part of their spiritual role. Others described strict routines, limited sleep, and constant pressure to stay in alignment. One of the most disturbing parts was how far the belief went. Followers claimed Amy could perform spiritual surgeries, healing serious illnesses remotely. Some genuinely believed they were being cured, while others later said money was exchanged for these sessions. In one case, a man left his family and job to join the group, only to be found days later disoriented and wandering alone after being separated from them during what they described as a mission. Inside the group, behavior could become extreme. Live streams showed moments where members were verbally attacked, pressured, or forced to justify themselves in front of others. Former followers described environments where questioning leadership wasn't allowed and where personal identity slowly disappeared into the group's belief system. Even basic decisions, like relationships, sleep, or daily routines, were influenced by the group's structure. And then there was Amy herself. Over time, her health visibly declined, yet followers insisted it was part of a spiritual transformation. She claimed she was absorbing the pain of humanity, even as her condition worsened. In 2021, she died, but the story didn't end there. When authorities eventually discovered her body, it had been kept by followers in a home, decorated and preserved as if she were still spiritually present. What makes Love Has Won especially disturbing isn't just what they believed, it's how openly it all happened. The live streams, the claims, the control, it was all visible, happening in real time, watched by thousands of people online. Number 2, the Zizians. In the mid-2000s, online spaces like Less Wrong were filled with programmers and philosophers trying to answer one question: how to prevent artificial intelligence from destroying humanity. They spoke in logic, probabilities, and systems, treating the human mind like something that could be optimized. For most, it stayed theoretical. But for one user, it didn't. Her name was Jack Lasota, later known online as Ziz, a programmer from Alaska who became deeply immersed in these communities after struggling to find stability in California's Bay Area. At first, her ideas were dismissed as extreme, but over time they evolved into something far more dangerous. Ziz began arguing that human identity could be broken apart and rebuilt, that emotions were flaws, and that morality itself was a system that needed to be overridden. Followers were pushed to question everything: who they were, what they felt, and even whether right and wrong actually existed. Techniques like isolation and sleep deprivation reportedly emerged, slowly eroding resistance and reinforcing belief. A small, tight-knit group called the Zizians formed around her, cutting ties with the outside world and creating environments where their ideas couldn't be challenged. Over time, the line between theory and reality disappeared. They began to believe that if reality was just one of many possible timelines, then extreme actions, even violence, could be justified if it led to a better outcome overall. And by the early 2020s, that belief started showing up in the real world. In Vallejo, California, an elderly landlord named Curtis Lind was lured to his own property and suddenly attacked by members of the group. Stabbed dozens of times, a sword driven straight through his chest, losing an eye in the process. He survived, barely, managing to fire back and kill one attacker. Just weeks later, in a quiet suburb of Pennsylvania, Richard and Rita Zajko were found shot to death in their home, both killed with a firearm in what didn't appear to be a random attack. Their daughter, a highly educated researcher with ties to the group, quickly became a person of interest. Around the same time, writings linked to the Zizians surfaced, describing murder not as a crime, but as something that could be justified if it served a greater outcome. Then, in January 2025, the violence escalated again. In Vermont, a routine traffic stop turned into a shootout when suspected members opened fire on Border Patrol agents, killing Agent David Mayland within minutes. Days earlier, on the opposite side of the country, another member had tracked down Curtis Lind, the same landlord who had survived the earlier attack, and this time stabbed him to death outside his home. What makes the Zizians especially disturbing is how it all connects. Educated individuals, acting with intent, tied together by a belief system that treats reality as flexible and human life as something that could be justified away. Several members have since been arrested while others disappeared, and the full extent of the network remains unclear. The Zizians weren't just an internet cult. They were a group that started online and then brought those beliefs into the real world. Number 3. The 764 Cult. Unlike traditional cults, this one doesn't begin with a single leader or a fixed location. It exists as a decentralized network spread across the internet, often referred to as 764, and its subgroups. It traces back to 2021, when a 15-year-old from Texas named Bradley Cadenhead created one of the first groups after being exposed to earlier extremist chat communities. What started as a small online space quickly evolved into something far more structured, built around control, shock value, and status through increasingly extreme behavior. Even after Cadenhead was arrested and sentenced, the network didn't disappear. It spread across platforms like Discord, Telegram, and online games, turning into a global system that continues to adapt. Its members don't recruit in obvious ways. Instead, they target vulnerable users, sometimes as young as 8 years old, on platforms that appear completely normal. They pose as peers, build trust over time, and slowly create emotional dependency. Once that trust is established, the dynamic shifts. Private interactions are used to gain leverage, and control becomes the goal. What follows goes far beyond typical online manipulation. Victims are pushed into increasingly harmful situations, creating a cycle where leaving becomes extremely difficult. In documented cases, individuals were pressured into actions meant to prove loyalty, with that material then used to maintain control. Some were even pressured to involve others, turning victims into recruiters and allowing the network to grow. One example is a teenage girl named Penelope, who became deeply involved in these groups and was gradually influenced into increasingly dangerous behavior over time, eventually leading to a fatal outcome. At the same time, the network began extending into real-world violence. In one widely reported case, a teenage member in Romania attacked and killed an elderly woman while recording the act, reportedly to gain recognition within the group. Other cases across countries like the UK, Sweden, and the United States have involved planned attacks and violent incidents carried out to prove status. Investigations have linked the network to hundreds of ongoing cases, spanning multiple countries and jurisdictions. What makes this group especially disturbing is its structure. It doesn't rely on a single leader, and it doesn't depend on a fixed location. It spreads through anonymity, imitation, and escalation, meaning it can rebuild itself almost immediately after being shut down. Because in the end, this isn't just an internet cult. It's a system designed to operate in plain sight, using access, anonymity, and control to keep going. Number 4. Twin Flames Universe. It started as something almost harmless, an online coaching program built around one idea. Somewhere in the world, there is one person who is your perfect match, your twin flame. And if you follow the right steps, you will find them. That idea was turned into a business by Jeff and Shalia Devine, who built an online movement promising both love and purpose. But according to former members, what developed behind the scenes was far more controlling. One example is Angie, a Canadian administrative worker who joined during a vulnerable period. At first, she described feeling supported and accepted. But over time, she says she was encouraged to pursue a man who repeatedly rejected her, even showing up at his home because she had been told he was her twin flame. When he threatened legal action, the guidance wasn't to stop. It was to push through and break the block. Another former member, Victoria, described a similar shift. What began as personal development slowly turned into a system where every doubt, rejection, or negative emotion was treated as her own failure, something that required more coaching, more sessions, and deeper involvement to fix. Over time, she became both financially and emotionally dependent on the group, while also being expected to help bring in new members. In some cases, the influence went even further. Former members reported being told that their identity itself was incorrect, that every person is either fully masculine or fully feminine, and that their true role might not match who they believed they were. Some individuals say they were pushed to change their name, appearance, and lifestyle to align with what the group defined as their correct identity. The system reinforced itself in a way that made it difficult to leave. If results didn't come, the explanation was never the method, it was the individual. Members were encouraged to continue investing in courses and coaching, sometimes spending tens of thousands of dollars, while being told they were close to a breakthrough. Questioning the structure wasn't really an option. Former followers described being told that doubting the leadership was equivalent to doubting something higher. Over time, the teachings escalated further, with leaders presenting themselves as divine figures and the ultimate authority within the system. Authorities eventually took notice, launching investigations into allegations of coercion, financial exploitation, and manipulation. Reports described members becoming isolated from family, pressured into unpaid labor, and making major life decisions under the group's influence. Number 5. The TikTok cult. This one doesn't start in isolation. It starts in the spotlight. In the early 2020s, a group of young dancers began going viral on TikTok, gaining millions of followers and landing major opportunities. Many were connected to a talent management company called NXIVM Films, founded in 2021 by Robert Shin, who also leads Shekinah Church in Los Angeles. On the surface, it looked like a fast track to success. Brand deals, collaborations, luxury filming locations. But according to former members, families, and lawsuits, the company and the church were closely linked, and what started as career growth gradually became something more controlling. Dancers were recruited through creator houses and management deals, then gradually introduced to a system where professional success, finances, and personal life became increasingly connected. Former members say the line between the talent agency and the church was often unclear, with the same leadership, overlapping environments, and expectations tied to both. Some reports claim members gave up large portions of their income, sometimes as much as 70 to 80%, through a combination of management fees and religious donations, tying their finances closely to the organization. One of the most well-known cases involved Miranda Derrick, who had built a large following with her sister. In 2021, shortly after joining NXIVM, her family says her behavior changed rapidly. She stopped communicating, cut off contact, missed her grandfather's funeral after canceling just before her flight, and later married another NXIVM member in a private ceremony her family says they weren't informed about. When they visited her, they described her as withdrawn and unlike herself. Similar stories began to surface. Families reported loved ones distancing themselves, becoming deeply involved in the group, and restructuring their lives around it. Former members alleged that individuals were encouraged to cut ties with outsiders, while families described sudden personality shifts, changes in behavior, appearance, and communication that seemed to happen within weeks. Multiple dancers within the group also entered relationships or marriages with other members, raising further concerns about how personal decisions were being influenced. By 2022, the situation went public when Miranda's family posted a video saying they believed she was being controlled. The video went viral, more families came forward with nearly identical experiences, and civil lawsuits followed, with allegations including manipulation, isolation, and financial exploitation. In 2025, federal agents conducted a raid linked to the organization as part of a broader investigation into alleged crimes including financial misconduct and trafficking-related offenses, though reports at the time did not confirm criminal charges directly tied to that operation. At the same time, those involved have denied these accusations. Miranda Derrick has stated she is not part of a cult and that her decisions were personal, while 7M Films and Robert Shin maintain the company is simply a talent agency and not connected to the church in the way critics claim. Number 6. QAnon. It began in 2017 on anonymous message boards, where a user calling themselves Q started posting cryptic, vague messages claiming to be a high-level government insider with access to classified information. These posts described a hidden world where a secret cabal of elites, politicians, celebrities, and billionaires controlled governments, media, and global events, allegedly engaging in child trafficking and other extreme crimes, while then-President Donald Trump was secretly working to expose them in a coming event known as the Storm. None of these claims were supported by evidence, but QAnon didn't spread like a normal conspiracy. It spread like a game. Followers were encouraged to do their own research, decoding vague clues, interpreting symbols, and connecting unrelated events until the theory started to feel real. The more confusing and complex it became, the more convincing it seemed, creating the illusion of hidden knowledge that only insiders could understand. Millions of people were eventually drawn into this belief system, many becoming deeply consumed by it, spending hours each day online, following updates, watching interpretations, and reinforcing each other's beliefs in isolated communities. Over time, it began to reshape how they saw the world. News, science, and even personal relationships were reinterpreted through the lens of the conspiracy. Families were torn apart, with parents cutting off children, partners separating, and lifelong relationships collapsing as believers became convinced that those around them were either asleep or part of the problem. What made QAnon especially dangerous was its flexibility. It absorbed almost any conspiracy theory, from government cover-ups to aliens, making it adaptable to nearly anyone's fears or beliefs. And eventually, it didn't stay online. In January 2021, QAnon beliefs played a significant role in the storming of the U.S. Capitol, where followers believed they were helping trigger the storm themselves. Beyond that, multiple real-world incidents, including kidnappings, armed standoffs, and murders, have been linked to individuals influenced by the movement, prompting authorities to classify it as a potential domestic terror threat. What makes QAnon so disturbing isn't just what it claims, it's how it pulls people in. It offers a sense of purpose, secret knowledge, and belonging, slowly replacing reality with a narrative where doubt becomes proof, and questioning the belief system only pushes people deeper into it. Number 7. Final Fantasy House. In the early 2000s, what started as a normal online fandom around Final Fantasy VII slowly turned into something far more disturbing. At the center was a woman named Jennifer Cornett, who began contacting fans online and convincing them of a belief called soul bonding, the idea that they were the reincarnated versions of characters from the game. At first, it sounded harmless, almost like roleplay, but it didn't stay that way. Followers weren't allowed to choose who they were. Roles were assigned to them, slowly reshaping their identity until the line between reality and fiction started to disappear. Victims were invited to visit and eventually move into what became known as the Final Fantasy House. At first, it felt like a place for fans to connect, but once inside, everything changed. Members were isolated, cut off from friends and family, and pressured to fully accept their assigned identities. One victim described being forced into exhausting mind regression sessions, lying on the floor, listening to game music for hours, trying to unlock memories of a life that never existed. Inside the house, control became constant. One member was forced to work while the others refused, making him the sole provider, while also demanding he do chores, give up money, and follow strict rules. Food became scarce, sleep was disrupted, and the environment turned chaotic, filled with screaming fights, manipulation, and emotional abuse. The apartment itself deteriorated into filth, while the people inside it became increasingly dependent on the group. And beneath it all, there was a darker pattern. The leader didn't just assign identities randomly, she chose them based on what she wanted from people. Relationships, control, even intimacy were shaped through this system, turning belief into a tool for manipulation. Over time, victims described feeling drained, confused, and unable to think clearly. Classic signs of psychological control. Eventually, one member escaped and published a detailed warning online, exposing what had been happening inside the house. By the time people started paying attention, the group had already disappeared, changing names, moving locations, and even shifting into new fandoms to start the process again. Number 8. University of Cosmic Intelligence. A man named Rashad Jamal began posting videos in 2020, presenting himself as a prophet and building what he called the University of Cosmic Intelligence, a digital movement based on hidden knowledge, alternate realities, and the idea that certain people were spiritually superior beings. Followers paid monthly subscriptions to access his teachings, where he spoke about conspiracies involving shape-shifting elites, controlled weather systems, and higher dimensions. At first, it looked like just another fringe online community, but over time, the behavior of his followers began to change. In St. Louis, multiple adults connected to the group started isolating themselves, cutting off family, quitting jobs, and spending more time in online sessions. Neighbors reported strange rituals, people gathering at sunrise, chanting, digging in the yard, even running outside during storms. Then, in August 2023, 6 people linked to the group, including 2 toddlers, suddenly vanished. Their home was left exactly as it was. Food still in the microwave, laundry mid-cycle, nothing packed, no signs of struggle. Just gone. And it didn't stop there. In separate cases, individuals tied to the group were linked to violent incidents after becoming deeply involved in the teachings. One man, who had no serious criminal history, became obsessed with the content, selling personal belongings, isolating himself, and spending hours engaging with the material, before committing an act of extreme violence against his own family. In another case, 2 followers lured a couple to a remote location under false pretenses, leading to a deadly confrontation. What makes this case especially disturbing is how it spread. There was no central location, no physical compound, just videos, live streams, and online communities. Even after Rashad Jamal was arrested and sentenced to prison, his followers continued supporting him, sharing his teachings, and keeping the movement alive. Number 9. Silk Road. It started as a hidden website, one you couldn't access through a normal browser. Around 2011, a platform called Silk Road appeared on the dark web, accessible only through a network called Tor, which allowed users to stay completely anonymous. At first, it was presented as something almost idealistic, a free marketplace where people could buy and sell anything without government control. But very quickly, it became something else entirely. The site was created by a man named Ross Ulbricht, who operated under the alias Dread Pirate Roberts. His vision was to build a digital black market based on total anonymity. Payments were made using Bitcoin, making transactions difficult to trace. And because of that, the marketplace exploded. Within a short time, Silk Road was hosting thousands of listings, from illegal drugs to fake identities, hacking services, and weapons. What made Silk Road different wasn't just what was being sold, it was how structured it was. It operated like a real business. Sellers had ratings, buyers left reviews, there were rules, moderators, and even customer support. It created a strange sense of trust in a completely illegal environment. People who had never met, never spoken, and never knew each other's identities were doing business daily, because the system made it feel safe. But behind that structure, things were escalating. As the platform grew, so did the risks. Authorities across multiple countries began investigating, trying to figure out who was running the site. Meanwhile, Ulbricht was becoming more deeply involved, allegedly ordering actions to protect the platform, including attempts to silence individuals he believed were threats. What started as a marketplace was turning into a cult-like setup. In October 2013, the operation finally collapsed. The FBI tracked Ulbricht to a public library in San Francisco, where he was arrested while logged into Silk Road as its administrator. They seized his laptop on the spot, capturing all the evidence they needed. The site was shut down, and Ulbricht was later sentenced to life in prison without parole. But even after Silk Road was taken down, copies of the marketplace began appearing almost immediately. New versions, new names, same system, proving that the idea itself couldn't be easily stopped. These were some of the most disturbing cults and communities the internet helped create or hide. If you want to see even darker stories, click the next video on your screen right now.